In an astonishing turn of events, Prince Edward reportedly evicted Queen Camilla from Windsor Lodge, officially transferring ownership of the entire property to his daughter. There is even a photograph circulating of Camilla's personal nameplate literally tossed into a waste bin during a public event. Frankly, the most chilling aspect of this entire saga is how completely oblivious the attendees were until the damage was already done. Picture this. You are at a dignified Windsor Heritage Memorial function. Hundreds of flashbulbs are popping. Lady Louise Windsor is gliding toward her designated chair in a sophisticated black gown, her hair elegantly swept back, focused entirely on honoring her lineage and executing her responsibilities as a devoted granddaughter. Suddenly, just as she approaches her row, a high-ranking courtier from Camilla's inner circle steps forward in plain view of the crowd, yanks the bronze plaque engraved with Lady Louise's name off the seat, and discards it directly into a wicker trash basket nearby. He does it without a second thought, immediately substituting it with a nameplate belonging to a loyalist from Camilla's camp. Louise is left standing there, forced to watch her identity treated like literal rubbish, while astonished murmurs ripple through the rows behind her and press cameras record the entire insult. What truly breaks my heart is that a 20-year-old young woman had to endure this agonizing public disrespect entirely on her own in the middle of that aisle. Then, Camilla glides past her with a chilling, smug expression for the media, allegedly whispering a comment along the lines of, "Part of royal life is recognizing when it is time to yield." It's a uniquely calculated form of malice, isn't it? It is masqueraded as grandmotherly guidance, but it functions as a blatant threat wrapped in royal decorum. Remarkably, Louise quietly retreated and accepted the slight just to ensure the ceremony proceeded without a scene, an act that speaks volumes about her integrity compared to anyone else in that room. The image that truly haunts me is picturing what those precise seconds felt like for her. From Louise's point of view, you spend your entire life deliberately avoiding the limelight, never chasing fame, never demanding special treatment, simply showing up when requested and fulfilling your obligations with dignity. Then, in front of the entire upper echelon of your world, an official literally drops your name into the garbage. The heavy bronze marker striking the bottom of that wicker basket must have resonated through the air. Perhaps the sound was muffled, or perhaps it clinked loudly against other debris, but to Louise, that noise likely echoed like a heavy door slamming shut on her future. She just stood there, barely 20, with no mother nearby to comfort her in that exact moment, and no father within arm's reach to protect her. It was nothing but her own internal fortitude keeping her spine straight as a brutal message was broadcast to the world. You are no longer welcome here, and we are not even going to pretend otherwise. Now, before we uncover the deeper layers of this retaliation, if you love dissecting royal power plays and the high-stakes chess matches occurring behind palace walls, make sure to hit that subscribe button for Crown Watch. We are tracking every single angle of this feud. All right, let's jump right back into the timeline. Prince Edward was actually seated across the aisle witnessing this entire public degradation unfold. This is where the chronology becomes truly fascinating. Edward has historically been perceived as the gentle, unassuming sibling, right? He is the brother who avoids disputes, embraces a quieter life, and has never attempted to position himself as an aggressive player in royal chess games. Observers have underestimated his resolve for decades. They misinterpreted his mild demeanor as helplessness, when in reality it was deliberate strategy. There is a massive distinction between an individual who lacks the capacity to fight and one who merely chooses to hold their fire until the perfect moment arrives. But watching his young daughter suffer a public ambush while Camilla's faction aggressively claimed the front row of prestige, that was apparently his breaking point. That very evening, Edward retreated to his private office within Windsor Castle and penned a document currently described as a secretly sealed covenant. This is essentially an unassailable legal mandate that strips Queen Camilla of her residency privileges at Windsor Lodge, shifting those exact rights directly to Lady Louise. The specific detail that highlights how serious this was is that he melted red wax and stamped his personal signet ring directly onto the parchment. This was no mere email or polite note of protest. This was traditional royal protocol being turned into a precise weapon. He utilized the monarchy's own historic legal frameworks against an individual who assumed those very rules could never touch her. The following morning, King Charles discovered the existence of the covenant, and palace insiders claim he sat at his desk staring at his brother's red wax stamp, completely paralyzed. He recognized a legal reality that Camilla had entirely overlooked. The covenant had effectively blocked every single escape route. Charles couldn't issue a sovereign decree to nullify the document or cancel Edward's mandate because doing so would mean directly defying the finalized, sacred wishes of Queen Elizabeth II. That was the masterclass trap Edward had set. This feud is not merely about Windsor Lodge as a piece of real estate. It's about what that historic home symbolizes. Camilla has consistently clung to Windsor Lodge as ultimate validation of her status within the dynasty, a symbol of her dominance and permanence. In one move, Edward demonstrated that her permanence was entirely conditional. He proved that the quiet brother everyone ignored had been watching the entire time, cataloging every insult, noting every detail, and waiting for the exact moment when the receipts could be displayed so definitively that no defense remained. Yet, the plot runs even deeper and reveals a strategy far more calculated than a father simply reacting in anger. In the days that followed, Edward allegedly spent his midnights navigating the restricted palace archives, using a flashlight to search through centuries-old oak cabinets for a very specific piece of evidence. What he ultimately uncovered was a leather-bound registry dating back to 1701. Within these ancient estate trust papers lay an airtight provision stating that the property and residency privileges of Windsor Holdings automatically devolve to the descendants of the direct sovereign line if the reigning monarch enters a marriage with a divorced woman. Now, whether that ancient clause translates seamlessly into modern legal jargon or presents a more intricate legal puzzle is irrelevant. The crucial point is that Edward unearthed historical documentation that provided his maneuver with absolute constitutional legitimacy. Furthermore, right beneath that historical clause, there was reportedly a handwritten notation penned by Queen Elizabeth II herself, explicitly reiterating that Windsor Lodge must be preserved for service devoid of ambition. Service devoid of ambition. That specific phrase functions as a stinging indictment of the entire agenda Camilla was reportedly orchestrating. Queen Elizabeth II dedicated her historic reign to embodying the concept of duty without self-promotion. Yet here was her distinct handwriting anchoring that exact principle to the very estate Camilla was attempting to claim for her personal inner circle. Edward must have realized the momentum had entirely shifted at that moment, standing in the dark archive with a flashlight and a centuries-old text, realizing his late mother had foreseen this exact type of territorial overreach and left a legal shield behind. Consider what Edward allegedly stumbled upon next. Inside the reinforced steel vault of the Windsor Estate Management Office sat a dense portfolio bearing the restricted stamp of the late Queen's private office. Inside was a comprehensive architectural remodeling plan for Windsor Lodge, drafted months prior without a single member of the immediate royal family being notified. The blueprints detailed a plan to convert Windsor Lodge into a permanent, legally protected compound for Tom and Laura, Camilla's children from her first marriage, and her grandchildren during major state events. The precise detail that reportedly made Edward's blood run cold was an architectural schematic showing Lady Louise's personal memorial space completely demolished, designated to be replaced by an expansive gaming lounge for Camilla's descendants. That's no longer a simple property disagreement. That's an intentional erasure of identity. Camilla had intended to take a shared dynastic legacy asset and transform it into exclusive territory for her own biological bloodline. She had been organizing this operation in complete secrecy for months. The gaming lounge detail is what lingers in the mind because it's so casually cruel. It wasn't even a functional room like a study, an office, or a library. It was an entertainment zone built directly over a space intended to honor a young woman's loyalty and historical service. The symbolism is so heavy-handed, it feels almost surreal. Consequently, when Camilla's network of loyal courtiers discovered that Edward had been auditing the archives and inspecting the estate files, she immediately ordered him to a tense meeting at Windsor Lodge. She was reportedly seated behind a massive mahogany desk, casually spinning the heavy brass key of the property on her fingertip, and immediately began accusing him of betraying the crown, attempting to defame her reputation, and planting seeds of rebellion within the household. She explicitly threatened to deploy her substantial media connections to socially isolate Edward's family, ensuring they vanished.
King Charles III found himself trapped in an agonizing dilemma. He was reportedly seen sitting in his private study at Buckingham Palace with his face buried in his hands, flanked on one side by the 1701 Covenant documentation and on the other by Anne's official confirmation directive. His spouse occupied one side of the ledger, his siblings and the sacred legacy of his late mother occupied the other. Late that evening, Camilla allegedly stormed into his office, visibly distraught, and demanding that he issue an immediate royal decree to nullify the entire takeover, strip Louise of her newly confirmed status, and penalize Edward. Charles was forced to look at his wife and admit that his hands were completely tied. His sovereign authority to shield her from this specific consequence had been entirely neutralized by the ironclad provisions of the 1701 framework. If he deliberately exercised his kingly powers to shred that covenant and mask Camilla's hidden remodeling agenda, it would trigger an unprecedented constitutional emergency and fracture the public image of the Windsor family before the international media. The very partner who had elevated her to the rank of queen, despite intense public resistance, was now entirely powerless, reduced to watching the mechanisms of justice unfold. Then came the actual execution of the eviction. The visual descriptions emerging from palace sources are practically cinematic. At precisely 2 p.m, under a sharp Windsor sun, a fleet of black vehicles bearing royal crests pulled into the courtyard. The estate administration team emerged with solemn expressions. No pleasantries, no lighthearted greetings. The legal mandate embedded within Edward's covenant was activated instantly. The initial phase involved the immediate termination and cancellation of the staff roster that Camilla had personally vetted. Her hand-picked attendants, who had been confidently striding through the corridors just 24 hours prior, were informed that they no longer possessed any administrative authority within Windsor Lodge. Her entire logistical privilege of placing personal staff was terminated on the spot. Simultaneously, security technicians approached the digital access panels at every entrance, systematically deleting the old biometric data and entry codes that Camilla's loyalists utilized to control the compound. Brand new entry protocols were programmed using top-tier security encryption, and from that exact hour forward, only Prince Edward and Lady Louise possessed the administrative access keys. That detail regarding the modification of the digital security matrix is so incredibly final. It isn't just a matter of changing a physical lock, it is a systematic digital lockout. Every single electronic barrier in that facility forgot her fingerprint, her passcode, and her clearance, one by one, until the entire estate ceased to recognize her as an authorized resident. Princess Sophie, Edward's wife and Louise's mother, was reportedly observing this entire structural dismantling from the entrance porch. The description of her standing there in a tailored wool coat, eyes reflecting an undercurrent of sadness, but also the fierce resolve of a mother who had successfully secured justice for her child, forms the emotional center of this entire saga. She watched Camilla's inner circle descend into panic as they realized the security master codes had been altered, rushing through the private suites and packing Camilla's confidential files and personal artifacts into basic cardboard moving boxes. As the sun began to dip below the ancient tree line of Windsor Park, Camilla's chief administrator, the very individual who had personally dropped Louise's bronze name marker into the trash at the memorial function, was seen looking pale and broken-shouldered. He was forced to walk a silver platter across the courtyard toward Princess Sophie. Resting upon that platter was the primary bronze key to the entire lodge, the ultimate token of the residency Camilla had so desperately coveted. He was required to bow as low as protocol demanded, presenting the key with absolute mortification written across his face. Sophie maintained absolute silence. She gracefully retrieved the bronze key from the silver platter, the metal reflecting the evening twilight. That soft, distinct clink of the key lifting off the platter signaled the absolute conclusion of Camilla's unauthorized tenure at Windsor Lodge. The palace press office attempted to release a heavily sanitized statement that evening, trying to characterize the entire move as a standard logistical reorganization of crown properties. However, the next morning, a major UK newspaper printed a special edition that completely exposed the palace warfare. The front page featured an exclusive, tight close-up photograph of Camilla bowing her head, her exhausted eyes cast downward as she hurried into a waiting vehicle to escape the Windsor grounds. The bold headline read, "Edward strips Windsor Lodge from the Queen." The accompanying investigative piece fully exposed the hidden architectural blueprints, the secret strategy to claim the compound for her personal descendants, and the scandalous incident involving Louise's nameplate being discarded like trash. A wave of public anger ignited instantly, particularly among citizens who recognized the profound unfairness inflicted upon a young royal who was simply trying to honor her lineage. The expansive walkway leading towards Windsor Castle quickly filled with crowds of people carrying white roses, the traditional emblem of purity, honor, and enduring loyalty. Gathering in vocal solidarity with Lady Louise, they unfurled large banners reading, "The quiet loyalists deserve their inheritance too." Frankly, that phrase might be the most devastating element of this entire situation, because it completely reframes the narrative. Louise never hunted for cameras. She never demanded prominence. She simply showed up, executed her duties, and endured a public slight to protect the dignity of a state ceremony. The public recognized that humility and decided that she was far more deserving of the estate than the individuals who aggressively demanded it. Camilla was left sequestered in an isolated room behind heavy, drawn draperies, hiding from the lenses of paparazzi, forced to listen to every single chant echoing from the crowds outside the gates. Every shout functioned as a public reprimand. She could only stare at the front-page newsprint, looking at her own disgraced visage exposed for global scrutiny. No administrative machinery or PR apparatus could rescue her reputation at this point. Public disapproval had effectively transformed her into an isolated figure within her own marital household. Then, Lady Louise executed a maneuver that completely transformed the nature of the entire dispute, rendering Camilla's defeat absolute in a manner that petty retaliation never could have achieved. After receiving the official bronze key to the lodge from her father, Louise completely declined to move into Windsor Lodge. She did not transform the historic home into a personal monument of triumph, nor did she utilize the space to inflict further public shame on her defeated stepmother. Instead, she issued an official personal communique to the public announcing a radical transformation for the purpose of Windsor Lodge. Moving forward, the entire historic estate is slated to function as a specialized sanctuary for the children of military personnel who have served the country, as well as the international headquarters for carriage-driving charitable organizations. She took a contested piece of royal real estate and dedicated it entirely to public welfare. That masterstroke backed Camilla into a corner of absolute zero resistance, because you simply cannot outmaneuver a person who takes the very prize you were desperately plotting to seize and hands it over to military families, children, and charitable organizations. Louise's altruistic decision forced Camilla to accept the absolute boundaries she had so willfully violated, conquering her not through matching aggression, but through a devastating contrast of core values. The premium compound Camilla had secretly plotted to lock down for her private biological line is now permanently designated for individuals she has zero ties to, zero authority over, and zero ability to influence. Louise didn't merely win the immediate political skirmish, she rendered the entire conflict completely irrelevant by removing the prize from the chessboard entirely. On a quiet late afternoon, as the final golden rays of daylight began to recede, Camilla made a final, entirely solitary visit to Windsor Lodge. No aides, no security entourage. She walked quietly toward the cleared mahogany desk, her hands visibly shaking as she picked up a sentimental embroidered pen container, her very last personal artifact in the room, and slid it into a small handbag. Stepping out on the grand exterior porch, she found herself facing Louise, who was waiting quietly in the deep shadow of the overhead awning. Without uttering a single syllable, without offering an argument, and without making a sound, Camilla slowly bowed her head, extended her arm, and handed the final remaining operational key of the estate to the young woman. The Queen, who had confidently swept past Louise at the memorial ceremony with a biting comment about understanding when to step aside, was now the one stepping aside permanently from the very home she had attempted to claim. The ultimate unyielding lesson that has settled over the House of Windsor following this conflict is both simple and unsparing, and frankly, long overdue. The ultimate legacy of this historic dynasty will never belong to the opportunistic who constantly demand status and seize assets for their own advancement. It will eternally belong to the quiet loyalists who stand prepared to serve with the fewest